Welcome back, learner, to the deep dive. So imagine you catch an employee stealing company secrets, or you're dealing with a customer who's demanding a 50% discount on a premium product.
Yeah, a total nightmare scenario.
Right. But today, your management playbook isn't coming from some, like, Silicon Valley incubator. It's actually coming from a 300-year-old French manuscript that proves corporate HR and loss prevention are, well, they're absolutely not modern inventions.
No, not at all. It's actually the ultimate historical blind spot. I mean, we look at our inventory software and our corporate retreats and complex org charts, and we just assume that before the Industrial Revolution, running a business was just chaos.
Just a guy in a dusty apron yelling at a teenager.
Exactly. But human nature in the workplace and, the systems required to manage it, they really haven't changed nearly as much as we like to think.
Which brings us to our source text for today. We are looking at excerpts from a manual published in the year 1700. It's called La Maison Reglée et l'art de diriger la maison.
Which roughly translates to the regulated household and the art of managing the house.
Right, and it was written by this guy named Oettinger, who spent decades managing the estates of European nobility. But we're actually skipping the royal banquets today. Our mission is to really zero in on the final chapters of Book 3, where Oettinger drops the aristocratic focus and just delivers a masterclass on how to run merchant shops and artisan workshops.
Oettinger is so fascinating because he treats the shop floor with the exact same gravity as a king's court. I mean, he maps out the strict management, the technical skills, the training of apprentices, and the surprisingly intense hierarchy of these businesses.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the onboarding process for a new hire in the merchant's domain. So you are a successful Parisian merchant in 1700.
Painting a picture, I like it.
Yeah. And you bring on a new garçon de boutique, a shop boy or a clerk. Day one isn't just, sweeping up. The manual says the master must provide a complete, detailed memo of every single piece of merchandise in the house.
Every single piece.
Wholesale, retail, identifying marks, inventory numbers, and prices. Everything.
And, that isn't just some casual overview. The master is explicitly instructed to hide nothing. Like, he has to physically walk the apprentice through the magazines, the storehouses, right, and reveal all the suppliers.
Domestic and foreign, right?
Yeah, both. He is essentially handing over the entire operational blueprint of the business on day one.
Okay, wait. Giving a teenager the entire supply chain Rolodex? That sounds like a massive vulnerability. Like, what's to stop this kid from memorizing your Italian silk suppliers and your English wool contacts, walking out the door and just starting a rival shop?
It does seem crazy to us today.
It really goes against every modern instinct we have about protecting trade secrets.
Yeah.
Compartmentalizing information.
Well, what's fascinating here is how this highlights the sheer necessity of trust in the early modern economy. Today, you mitigate risk with technology.
Right. You give an employee a limited login.
Exactly. They can process a sale, but they can't access the supplier database or the profit margins. But in 1700, the clerk was the software.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If the master fell ill or had to travel to a trade fair for a month, the business would literally collapse if the clerk didn't hold the entire supply chain in their head. You couldn't afford to compartmentalize.
So the risk of empowering a potential rival it was outweighed by the immediate need for a fully autonomous deputy.
Exactly that. Operational need trumped security paranoias.
That makes total sense. I mean, the bottleneck wasn't the market, it was the bandwidth of the master. To scale, you basically had to clone your own brain into your clerks.
Pretty much. But they didn't just need a photographic memory. The source outlines some highly specific, really technical skills required to even stand behind the counter.
The physical mechanics of selling, right?
Yeah, they were incredibly demanding. The manual specifies they must know how to ulner, which is to measure by the ell, a traditional unit of length for fabrics and pizer, to weigh accurately.
But the real hurdle was the math.
Oh, the math was brutal. They had to be human calculators, computing prices using both a pen and these things called jettons.
Right, the jettons.
Yes.
I want to pause on the jettons because this completely shifts how we should picture a 1700s transaction.
It really does.
Like, imagine you're standing at the counter. A customer wants 3¼ L's of velvet. You don't have a calculator. You don't even have a standardized decimal currency.
No, you're dealing in livres, sous, and denier.
Exactly, which function on like base 20 and base 12 systems. It's wildly complex. So to do this, the clerk uses jettons, which were these physical metal tokens, sliding them around a specially lined counting board.
It's essentially a flat abacus. The clerk is doing complex multi-currency multiplication physically in real time.
While maintaining eye contact.
Yes. While maintaining eye contact and carrying on a conversation with the buyer, it was a highly specialized kinetic and mental skill. And this is the wild part. They had to execute this flawless math while simultaneously functioning as 18th century loss prevention officers.
Oh, the shoplifting protocols. This is where the manual feels incredibly modern.
It's so familiar, right?
It really is. Like, modern retail workers are heavily trained on distraction tactics. A group comes in, asks a million questions, creates chaos, and, while you're distracted, inventory just walks out the door.
Yeah, shrinkage.
Right. And the 1700s manual warns about the exact same vulnerability.
Human behavior is remarkably consistent. The manual explicitly warns merchants to watch out for browsers who come in and ask to unfold many fabrics at once. Keep in mind, this isn't a modern boutique with neat rows of hangers.
Right. Everything is in heavy rolled bolts.
Exactly.
So a customer says, show me the red silk. No, wait, unroll the blue linen. Actually, let's see the green velvet. And within minutes, there is a literal wall of expensive draped fabric piled up on the counter.
Creating a massive visual blind spot.
Yes.
It's the perfect cover to slip a roll of lace or a cut of silk into a heavy winter coat. And Oettinger's solution to this is just fascinating.
A retail swarm.
Yeah. He says when a clerk spots this distraction technique, they are not supposed to handle it alone. They must call the master, the master's wife, or even summon the domestic maids and lackeys into the shop to keep a close eye on the merchandise.
See, I have to push back on that strategy a bit.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, calling the maid away from cooking or the lackey away from his duties just to come stand in the shop and stare at a customer. That sounds like a massive waste of household manpower. Was shoplifting really that existential of a threat, or is this just like a super paranoid merchant class?
Well, this raises an important question about the economic reality of the era. You see, the ratio of labor cost to the value of goods was entirely inverted compared to today.
Okay.
Today, labor is expensive and mass-produced clothing is relatively cheap. But in 1700, human labor, especially domestic servants, was incredibly cheap.
I see where you're going with this.
Right. A single bolt of imported Lyonnaise silk, however, could represent weeks or even months of revenue. If a thief walked out with one premium item, it could devastate the shop's quarterly margins. So yes, dropping everything to create a retail swarm around a suspicious customer was a highly rational economic decision.
Because the shrinkage was an existential threat.
Well, exactly. Wow.
Wow. So the clerk is guarding the inventory with their life, doing complex token math, and acting as the master's deputy. But none of that matters if they can't actually close the deal.
Right, the actual sale.
Yeah, we have to look at the psychological art of the sale. The manual gives very specific advice on how to handle difficult customers, specifically lowballers, people who misloan or make ridiculously low offers.
They all know the type.
Oh, for sure. A customer wants a premium item but offers a fraction of the asking price. And the natural instinct for a young, highly trained clerk who knows exactly how much that silk costs wholesale might be to, get offended, defend the product's quality, or just snap back.
But the manual absolutely forbids that. It says clerks must remain polite, active, and prompt. They have to be incredibly gracious, even when the offer is totally insulting.
And the justification the text gives is brutally honest.
It really is.
It essentially admits that merchants usually overprice their goods initially anyway.
Yeah, it's a peek behind the curtain of the 18th century markup. There were no standardized price tags. Retail was a high-friction negotiation. The manual is basically telling the clerk, look, we inflated the price by 40% to begin with. When the customer undercuts you by 50%, they aren't insulting your honor. They're just initiating the economic dance.
It's all just a game of anchoring.
Exactly, anchoring.
But, navigating that daily friction, smiling at cheapskates, fighting off thieves, managing the counting board, that takes a psychological toll. To keep these highly skilled clerks motivated, the master had to respect strict boundaries. And here's where it gets really interesting.
HR protections.
Yes. I always pictured 18th century apprentices as, like, Cinderella-style servants, doing whatever grueling chore the master demanded. But Oettinger outlines strict HR boundaries.
He explicitly forbids merchants from making their shop boys do the meaning domestic chores. The manual lists specific prohibitions. No washing dishes, no babysitting the master's children, and no cleaning shoes.
So why the strict boundary? If you own the kid's time, why not make him sweep the kitchen? Was this just an early plea for a positive corporate culture?
Well, it was entirely pragmatic and deeply tied to the legal structure of the time. First, the manual notes the psychological risk, right? If you make a clerk do menial household chores, they become disgusted with the trade. You break the spirit of the very person you need to run your complex business.
Makes sense.
But more importantly, making them do these things actually violated guild statutes and the original apprenticeship contracts.
Right, because guilds held monopolies on these trades. If a wealthy family paid a premium to apprentice their son to a silk merchant, that was a legal contract for a commercial education. If the merchant treats the kid like a scullery maid, he is in breach of contract.
Spot on. The guild could intervene, fine the master, or even strip them of their right to take on apprentices entirely. So while the merchant's domain and the domestic household occupied the exact same physical building, legally and professionally, an invisible ironclad wall separated them. Protecting that boundary was how you protected your investment in human capital.
Fascinating. So we've seen how merchants aggressively protected their inventory and managed the delicate psychology of the sale. But selling the goods is only the final step of the supply chain.
Right, they have to be made first.
Exactly. The real friction, where these early labor boundaries were tested to their absolute limits, was in how the goods were actually produced. Let's transition from the polished, polite storefront to the noisy, dangerous, and physically exhausting environment of the artisan's workshop.
The management dynamic shifts completely here. Whether the workshop is forging iron, cutting leather for shoes, or weaving cloth, the master artisan has a totally different set of daily duties than the merchant.
Right.
According to the text, the master's primary job is to cut and distribute work, keeping everyone constantly busy.
Which speaks to the economics of a production line. Like, idle hands mean the expensive raw materials aren't being turned into capital. But the manual also tasks the master with being the ultimate filter. They have to weed out the drunkards and the debauched.
Because an artisan workshop wasn't just a place of business, it was a tightly packed, closed ecosystem. A bad apple didn't just hurt productivity, they could physically endanger the workshop or corrupt the younger workers.
Higher hazard, right.
Exactly. The master had to protect the integrity of the team, but below the master were the journeymen, the compagnons.
These are the highly skilled workers who have finished their basic apprenticeship, but haven't acquired the capital or the guild approval to open their own shop yet.
Right.
And the manual gives a very specific, almost poetic instruction for how these journeymen are supposed to operate. It says they must execute orders perfectly, avoid wasting materials, and work with heart and affection, curd affection.
It sounds like modern corporate rhetoric, doesn't it?
It really does.
But heart and affection carried serious weight back then. It meant total alignment with the master's enterprise. You weren't just punching a clock and trading your labor for a wage. You were expected to care about the quality of the product and the reputation of the workshop as if it were your own name on the door.
Which brings to mind modern tech startups demanding workers treat the company like a family. We tend to view that today as manipulative, right?
Yeah.
A way to extract unpaid overtime because ultimately the equity belongs to the founders. But in the 1700s artisan workshop, that rhetoric wasn't a metaphor. They actually meant it literally.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, working with heart and affection was the primary mechanism for social mobility in the 18th century. Today, exceeding expectations might get you a promotion to middle management. In the artisan workshop, the manual explicitly states that a loyal journeyman could one day become a master himself, often by marrying into the master's family.
Yeah, it specifically says the journeyman might become the master's son-in-law. Or, if the master passes away, the loyal journeyman might marry the master's widow.
This is crucial to understand. Under the laws of the time, a widow often inherited her late husband's guild rights and the physical workshop. But society, and often the guilds themselves, made it incredibly difficult for a woman to run the production floor alone.
Right.
So a highly skilled, trusted journeyman who already knew the business inside and out was the logical partner.
We really have to look at this not just as an 18th century romance, but as a brilliant M&A strategy, mergers and acquisitions.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. If you are a journeyman without the immense capital required to buy a building, buy tools, and pay guild fees, your only path to ownership is equity transfer. You marry the widow, you acquire a fully functioning licensed business, and she secures a partner to keep the enterprise generating revenue. You don't just climb the corporate ladder, you marry the board of directors.
Exactly. The stakes for being a good worker were astronomically high. Business and family were entirely fused. You ate at the master's table. You slept under their roof. When they evaluated your heart and affection, they were evaluating you as a potential permanent member of a family dynasty.
But before you could even dream of negotiating an equity transfer by marrying the boss's daughter, you had to survive the absolute bottom rung of the ladder. Let's look at the humble artisan's apprentice.
Oh, the apprentices.
Yeah, if the merchant's clerk was protected by guild laws from washing dishes, the artisan's apprentice enjoyed no such luxury.
None at all. The manual details a grueling physical existence. They are the ones sweeping the shop and the street. They gather the scattered tools. They are the first to wake up in the morning to light the fires, and the last to go to sleep after locking up. It is pure, unfiltered grunt work.
And the text notes, they have to serve the journeymen directly. Like, they fetch their food and drink and even make the journeymen's beds.
Yes.
Now, why on earth would the apprentice be forced to act as a personal servant to a mid-level employee? The manual drops a brilliant piece of career advice here. It explicitly tells the apprentices that they must make the journeymen love them.
It reveals the true operational structure of the workshop. The master signs the apprenticeship contract, sure, but the master is busy sourcing raw materials, managing the finances, and selling the goods.
They don't have time to teach.
Right. They don't have time to stand over a teenager and teach them how to hold a hammer or temper steel. It is the journeymen who hold the actual tactile secrets of the trade.
The master's the financier, the journeyman is the technical trainer.
Exactly.
If the apprentice is lazy or, refuses to make the journeyman's bed, the journeyman will simply freeze them out. They'll give them busy work and refuse to teach them the complex skills. The apprentice will finish their multi-year contract and still be technically ignorant, basically ruining their career before it starts.
It's a strategic alliance born out of sheer necessity. The apprentice trades domestic subservience for technical mentorship.
So what does this all mean for you? Think about it like a modern unpaid intern, realizing that getting coffee for the mid-level managers is the actual secret to getting mentored, rather than trying to corner the CEO in the elevator.
That is a perfect analogy, and this power dynamic is further complicated by a final, brutal economic detail. The manual outlines the difference between paying and non-paying apprentices.
Right. The text points out that if a wealthy family pays the master a fee up front to take on their son, the apprentice's time is strictly regulated. It's essentially tuition.
But if you don't have the money,
Yeah, if you are a non-paying apprentice, you are locked into a much longer period of servitude.
you are paying for your room, board, and training with years of your life. It carries the heavy contractual weight of indentured servitude. You spend years sweeping floors and fetching beer before you are ever allowed to touch the tools and learn the trade that will eventually allow you to earn a wage.
It's a massive risk-reward matrix. You mortgage your youth for the chance to eventually become a journeyman, prove your heart and affection, and maybe, just maybe, marry the widow and take over the shop.
It was a harsh system, but it was incredibly structured. Every single tier, from the master managing the supply chain down to the apprentice making the beds, knew exactly what their duties were, what their boundaries were, and what the ultimate economic reward could be.
Which brings us full circle. We started this deep dive looking at the modern tech startup and the trendy retail store, assuming that complex management, loss prevention, and HR boundaries were recent inventions.
And they aren't.
No. Audiger's 1700 manual proves that the blueprint has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. We've seen merchants battling the exact same distraction tactics from shoplifters and utilizing the psychological dance of the markup.
We've seen the absolute necessity of trusting frontline workers with vulnerable supply chain data and the legal requirement to protect them from burnout and menial tasks. And in the Artisan workshop, we saw that relying on mid-level employees to train the new hires is a dynamic as old as industry itself.
The technology has evolved. I mean, we swapped counting boards and metal jettons for cloud-based spreadsheets, and we swapped bolts of silk for lines of code. But the human friction of running a business, the management of trust, hierarchy, and ambition remains exactly the same.
The 18th century workplace wasn't chaos. It was a highly calibrated machine. And understanding how they manage that machine gives us a much sharper lens to view our own modern corporate structures.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up today's deep dive into the regulated households and workshops of 1700, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Next time your modern company talks about having a family culture or requires you to take ownership and work with heart and affection, ask yourself, are we just repeating the 18th century artisan model? If we are, where is your guaranteed path to becoming the master of the shop?